Dr. Bridget Young here from babyformulaexpert.com. I'm hopping on really quick because I've had a lot of questions, understandably, about all the panic around the Baby Food Toxin Study. So I'm going to try to go over this very briefly and cover what was found, and more importantly, try to calm some panic and give you some actionable steps that are actually going to make you feel really good about keeping your baby safe. I have a few notes here. One, I'm really glad that people keep talking about toxins in baby formula because there is no more horrible place for toxins to be, but it also makes me a little upset that it's good journalism / bad practice to go after fear mongering for parents. So all of this gets hyped up in the media because it is so scary, and that just makes me so upset because it is so dang hard to be a parent these days. Multiple worse during a pandemic, and then to have to worry like, oh my god, I've done everything right, but the organic baby food I bought is poisoning my baby. Don't worry, take a deep breath. I'm going to give you some tips and go over some of the results to try to calm it down a little bit. Okay, so let's get into what happened. This is reminiscent several years ago. I have an old video about it. A third party, so an unaffiliated company, came out with a report of heavy metals and toxins in some baby foods and baby formula. Same thing, got tons of press, very scary, but kind of died down a little bit. And then a different organization measured heavy metals in baby foods again, and this is Healthy Babies Bright Futures, and they came out with a report in 2019, just publishing. I actually really liked their report because at the end of the report they actually just gave the data. They gave the names of the companies, what they measured, and what they found, and it's always so much better, I think, to have transparency. So what has now happened is the government has basically kind of gotten involved, asked for some internal reports from individual companies saying, we'd like to see your internal testing. And there's a push to have the FDA start regulating some of these heavy metals in foods. I don't know if they really will or not. That it remains to be seen. But what it means for you as a parent of a baby right now is sort of as follows. One, please don't panic for two reasons. One being, whatever is done is done. You can't go back and change what you fed your baby, and worrying about it won't change it. And if anything, it has if you're spending your time worrying instead of smiling or reading your baby a book, then it's having an impact on the future. Two, they talk a lot in the report about IQ. So if you have, like poisonous levels of lead or arsenic, very high levels, it can affect anyone, definitely infants' IQ development. But there's a lot of other things that actually usually have much more impact on IQ, especially at some of the levels in the foods that we're talking about. So like reading to your child, being with your child. If it's a young baby, talking to your baby, making eye contact with your baby. All of those things are really important, way more important than some of the levels in the lower levels in a lot of the foods they found. So I just want you to keep that in mind, and I hope you find that really encouraging. But moving forward, of course, I'm equally alarmed that there are heavy metals in baby foods at all. So let's talk about how we can reduce them. Oh, another one thing I just wanted to mention is a lot of times in the headlines you'll see arsenic detected in all baby food measured, or whatever the headline is. The word detected is very different from toxic levels. So things like arsenic and lead, while we definitely don't want to ingest them, it's impossible to remove them from all of our food. So there's acceptable levels of these things in drinking water because you can't, arsenic and lead are actual elements that exist in our earth. So you can never completely remove them. And we have very advanced equipment in the lab that can measure it down to the tiniest possible measurement. So you could give me all the baby food and formula in the world and I could detect arsenic and probably all of it. That doesn't mean the amount that your baby's consuming is high enough to cause any damage. So just be careful. They can play around with the wording of headlines to make it sound way scarier than it is. Really wanted to make that clear. But of course, what you want to know is how to reduce, what does this mean for you feeding your baby and feeling really good about the types of foods that you're picking. So let's go over. The worst offenders for foods were foods that I usually recommend parents try to avoid anyway. So what I mean by that is myself and all other nutritionists who work with young children and infants have certain goals for feeding solid foods. One, obviously you introduce foods slowly to your baby, but the goal is to increase the diversity of the foods they eat. just like adults. You know, we want to eat the rainbow of vegetables, all that stuff you hear. A variety of foods, which allows you to get a variety of nutrients to keep your body healthy. So if your goal is to build your baby up to a variety of foods and limit their dessert and sugar intake, if you're working toward that anyway, you're probably doing fine with their toxic intake. So let me give you a few examples of how I mean that. One, the worst offenders were rice products. Rice cereal, baby puffs, which are usually rice-based, teething biscuits or baby cookies, which again are usually rice-based. Those things are not necessary in your baby's diet at all. I have lots of videos on first foods to start with. Cereals are fine, but I actually have recommended for a long time that if you want to use a cereal, great. I like either oat cereal. Now they've got great ones. Oat, buckwheat, quinoa blend cereals are out there. The reason I usually prefer those is they have a little more protein, being any protein in it at all, and sometimes even a tiny bit of fat, whereas rice cereal is really just carbohydrate. So having a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat is going to have a little lower glycemic impact on your baby. It's going to help keep their blood sugar more constant. So that's one reason I wasn't recommending rice to begin with. And now we have another reason that rice has higher levels of arsenic, particularly in it, and so do rice products. Second, with puffs and baby biscuits, y'all, no child has ever gotten ill from a puff deficiency. They're fun, they're convenient, but they're totally unnecessary. And so just avoid, now that we know they're also likely to have high amounts of arsenic, avoiding them is probably best. But if you've been feeding your baby puffs, again, please don't panic. How much puffs are your baby eating? Are they eating, 3 or 4 at a time to practice their pincer grasp? That's fine. They're going to be okay. If they're eating an entire container a day, I would want you to change for 2 reasons. One, now we know arsenic, but 2, if they're eating a ton a day, then they're not eating other things, and we want them to be able to get a variety of foods, both for their nutrition and also expanding their palate. So things that you're working for, again, anyway, are in your corner, like moving towards diversity. Some of the other really big offenders were toddler meals, like tiny cups of macaroni and cheese. So these are little meals that you see sold in the baby aisle. And I've always said, if your baby, so it would be a toddler, an older baby or a toddler, if they're old enough to be eating macaroni and cheese, they're old enough to be eating what you are eating. They're eating, that's food. They're just eating food, which is great. But if your baby's that old, girl, feed them what you're eating. Don't make them a second meal. That is work for you. It encourages picky eating. Now, I know some toddlers are picky and you're doing your best, and I'm not criticizing you at all. But for people moving towards this, don't buy those meals. They're so expensive, like per pound, and you got to prep a second meal. And again, our goal is to increase infants' diversity of food so that by the time they're a toddler, they're just sitting at the table with you, eating the food the family is eating, which is just easier on everybody and also beneficial for feeding culture and all the fun things about food that aren't necessarily nutrition based. So avoiding those meals, again, is probably good anyway. If you need to feed one once in a great while, your baby is not going to have arsenic poisoning from one serving. If you're feeding that macaroni and cheese every single day, definitely stop. And again, we want you to move away from that single food feeding anyway to encourage a healthy diet. Other things that were a high offender were juice, which I am not the first person to say that babies don't need juice. So avoiding high amounts of juice is something we've been saying for a long time anyway. If you use juice, you should be, for an infant anyway, so any child, I would really say under the age of 2, I'd want you diluting it anyway so that it's not so sweet and encouraging that preference for sweet foods, which all babies have. So avoiding juice is going to be helpful anyway. And those were the biggest offenders. So that's really, really exciting that if you're working towards healthy feeding goals, you'd be avoiding the biggest offenders anyway. The 2 that were unfortunate and kind of surprising were sweet potato and carrot baby food, even in organic brands. This is a huge bummer because those are perfectly healthy foods and because babies love sweet potatoes and carrots. This is because they're higher sugar vegetables, so babies usually really like them. And so I actually have often said, like, oh, mix some meat in with sweet potato. They'll totally love it. And I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So again, if you've been feeding your baby sweet potato and carrot, they probably are loving it, and don't panic. What you can do, so my babies, thank God, because I don't have to worry about all this panic, are past this stage now. But I'm going to tell you what I would do if my babies were this stage. And it's actually what I did. I wanted to be like the hippie. Oh, look how long my hair is. I just really want to be a barefoot hippie mom until I try it and then I can't handle it. But I wanted to make all my own baby food and clearly could not keep up. So I did lazy baby food making, which is sweet potato and carrots are one of the best because just buy sweet potatoes like you would if you were making them for your family. Buy 4 extra, throw them in the oven, bake the heck out of them, and that's it. You have baby food. And then just literally scrape it into ice cube trays. Done. So you can just, you don't have to do it today. Do it whenever you would be making sweet potatoes anyway. Same thing with carrots. Go get some carrots, steam the heck out of them, like really mushy. Tip, when you put them in the steamer, put just a little bit of water at the bottom of the steamer. Enough that it won't all evaporate, but not a ton. Then when you go to mash them up, you probably will need to add a little bit of water, either mashing them or in a food processor. Use the water on the bottom of the steamer. That way any nutrients that leach out of the carrot during steaming, you capture them in the water and you put it right back in. You need to just really do that once. You can make a ton, put them in ice cube trays, and then boom, you've got carrots and sweet potato to get you through that first phase of eating. The first phase being like, 6 to 10 months. Every baby's different, but like 6 to 10 months when they're really focused on purees. And by the time they get closer to a year, they're finger eating, they're able to eat more mixed meals like from the family plate. And so it's really just those couple months when you would be buying purees anyway. And if you do this once, then you're made in the shade. If making baby food is totally not something that's ever going to be in your schedule, please don't panic. Just keep doing what you're doing. And all I would say is don't feed sweet potato and carrots every single day, which we would want you to be doing anyway. Of course, when you're first introducing foods, you have to go slowly. So I'm not talking about that time. Once you kind of are into routine and your baby's got a large repertoire to choose from, rotate. Again, seeing these numbers on one food, it can be really alarming, but it's only going to have really actual health implications if you're feeding that food all the time. So relevant to babies that are really, really picky eaters, or families that aren't introducing a lot of variety of foods. If that's you, call your doctor and ask them about it for sure. But I really believe for the vast, vast majority of families, this amount of heavy metals in our food supply for infants can easily be managed by making a few small tweaks like this. So I really hope that's encouraging. I was really encouraged to see. I'm a huge fan of baby food meat, which looked awesome. Like the cleanest food out there. I totally bought baby food meat. I tried to make my own. Horrible. I was like, oh, I can't even feed this to my kid in good conscience. But the commercial baby food meat, the texture is just so much better. And again, if you make your own sweet potato and carrots, I really don't think you have anything to worry about. If you also just feed sweet potato and carrots occasionally, not every single day, you totally fine using commercial. And then again, just focus on the things that I know you're focusing on anyway. Avoiding sweets like biscuits, avoiding rice, easy to do. And the big thing is moving towards a diversity in their diet. You're good to go. So please don't panic. Please feel free to share this with anybody who is really alarmed. It's just my worst fear that the type of parent who's very nervous about feeding and parenting anyway, this is just preying on those fears and making people even more alarmed, which is just honestly totally uncalled for in the middle of a pandemic when we're all freaking out anyway. So I hope that's helpful. I will bring you more videos as any new information comes out. I'm really hoping the FDA will choose to add this to things they regulate in baby food because it would just be so much easier to have it off all of our minds. And until then, the tips I gave you should make you feel really good about managing your infant's exposure to these metals. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for watching. You're doing an incredible job. You really are. There's no reason to panic. Keep up the excellent work, and I'll talk to all you guys soon. Bye. One of these days, I will remember to find the end button before I say goodbye. It's not today. Okay, there's one. Bye. Also, never on Instagram. Never going to get there. Yes.